transcript on?
Turn that on right now. Show captions, transcript. Yes. And we are live streaming. And I'm muted there. And I'm going to join. Okay, then I'm going to say start webinar. Here, let's see. I don't even have participants up. We've got 27 people in the waiting room. Here we go.
Okay.
Oh, come on, computer. Start. Start. Start.
Ta-da! Success.
Hello. Here
Hello.
we go. Here they come.
Hi, folks.
So, hello, everyone.
Hey,
Hi, Carly.
hello, how are you?
I am fine. How are you? I'm invisible. All you see is my hands.
Awesome.
So,
Okay, I just my iPad not doing double vision, so that's good.
all
All right, we're up to 32. What do you think we should do? Are we
let's
ready?
spiel and start.
Let's spiel. All right, we're live at the Loom with Carly and Janet again, and it looks like things are moving right along. And I'm Dawn, and I will be trying to make sure we're in the right place at the right time. Ask questions in the Q&A interface, please, and I'll relay them. You can chat in the chat interface. You can turn on closed captions for yourself and see the words scrolling across the bottom of the screen, or you can turn on the full transcript and see all of the words and they don't disappear, they stack up. Ask questions. I'm going to be in moderator space, just keeping an eye on everybody. And I think we're starting with you, Janet, right? And should I share those pictures?
Yeah, let's share the pictures because I want to show people how I'm threading from 2 chains at once. That was one of my objectives for this project. So,
all right, let's see. Let me get to share.
Yeah, I'll see which one you've got up first, and then I'll be able to comment.
Bigify it.
So this is from the front of the loom. It's before I started threading, and you can see that that's the angle I see while I'm threading, and I can see both sets of leaf sticks. There's a set at the top that have the ecru and the brown selvages, and then the sticks at the bottom have all of the multicolors that I wound as one chain. And I can clearly see one set from the other from my vantage point when I'm threading. I don't know that you can tell. Maybe you can see in the picture. Normally on my baby wolf, I lift my shafts by putting a shuttle in the jacks, but that raises the shafts up a little too high to see both sets of leaf sticks. So I've got it propped up on a different block this time so that it's just a little bit lower than my usual. Okay, and then the other
Next.
will show the 2 sets of leaf sticks. So there, I have the bottom set of leaf sticks in the boot laces that I normally use, and those are my method. I usually use long leaf sticks that go through those boot laces. And usually they're a little bit higher up. So I've got them hanging differently from normal so that they're a little bit lower. And then I have a second set of leaf sticks hanging from the castle. You can hang all of your leaf sticks from the castle, just from 2 different sets of cords so that they hang at different heights, whatever works for you. But I didn't find a way to have 2 sets of horizontal cords like I normally have that I could have at different heights very easily. So I went with this option. So if you can come back to me.
Okay, let me stop sharing and let me spotlight you.
Okay.
Spotlight for everyone. And I'm going to hide me.
And so parenthetically, last week, some folks were saying when Dawn spotlighted, you were still seeing me and Carly side by side. That's something to do with your Zoom interface, we think. And it could be, well, most of the people who mentioned it were on tablets, but there was at least one person on a laptop that had that experience. We're not sure what's causing that, but in the recording, the spotlight is working. So if you want to see one of us up close, you can see that in the recording after the event is over. So
And
here,
real quick, parenthetically, I am viewing as a participant on an iPad, and I can see that there is no way for me to change my view, even though you're spotlighted. You are both side by side, and
okay.
there is no button for me to push that says make them
You would be
something
looking
else.
to pin somebody, because
Yeah,
just putting it on speaker isn't going to work, because we keep swapping speaker back and forth,
right.
even though, yeah.
So
So
don't have it. I don't
yeah,
know.
it does seem like that's at least something missing from the iPad interface. It may be tablets in general, and at least one person said they weren't able to do it on their laptop either. So, but I'm able to do it on my laptop, so it must be something to do with the browser or the app or something. But it's not something we can do anything about. We're doing what we can. Okay, so now threading. I've got mine half threaded because I didn't want you to have to sit through all my threading. And I am going to continue threading. Here's my threading hanging on the loom. Halfway is right there. And the next couple of threads I need are from the ecru chain. And they go on shafts two threads on shaft 2. So I'm going to pull over my heddles for shaft 2, take threads from my ecru chain, thread them. Oops, I still have a tie on there. I usually keep the threads kind of corralled with the looper around them. I think I've got that here on this chain too, and there. And what I'm going to do, what I did the last time anyway, was to separate out part of them and then put the looper back around the others, that keeps them from getting quite as tangled up around each other. They don't pull their neighbors up as much. Anyway, okay. 2 threads from the ecru chain on shafts 2, both on shaft 2, because it's a little bit of basket weave. And I'll push them out of the way. And then I take I usually work in groups of 4 threads because I have 4 spaces between my fingers. And often, for 4 shafts, that works out with the threading. In this case, the threading is not in sets of 4. So my 2 coppers will be on shaft 4, and then the first 2 sparkly golds will be on 2, 3. So I'm going to pull over all those heddles. And I'll take these threads from the bottom set of leaf sticks. So that's all there really is to threading from 2 chains when you are working from back to front. You pull the threads you need from the top set of leaf sticks, and then you pull the threads you need from the bottom set of leaf sticks, and you alternate them in whatever ratios work with your threading requires. So that's really all I have to say about. Well, actually, one more thing. I want to say one more thing. One more thread sparkly gold here, and then I've got my my 16 ends of the pink. So what I'm going to do at this point is take all my threads. This is my threading check I do all the time, and I've been doing it for each. I check my threading when I've got the wide solid stripe, and then I've been checking my threading between the solid stripes. So if I look at my threading here, I can see that between these 2 solid stripes, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 ends on shaft 4, and I check my heddles. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, that's correct. And then I have 1, 2 ends on shaft 3, and I have 2 heddles on shaft 3. That is correct. They are side by side. Should they be side by side? They should not be side by side. That should be on shaft 4, which means I have a mistake somewhere. So this is exactly why I'm doing this check, to make sure I don't have mistakes. And sure enough, I can see right here in the very beginning of this stripe, I was supposed to go 1, 2, 3, and I have a 1, 2, 4. So I have to fix my threading, and I have found it within 16 ends rather than once I've already started weaving. So the short version is that I count rather than check. I could check each individual thread, but that could be time consuming. I tend to be a little impatient. Another really good and quicker check is to count the number of petals you should have on each shaft for the group of threads you're holding, and then confirm, do you really have that number of petals? And then, so in this case, I do have the right number on shaft 4, and I have the right number on shaft 3, and I do have a threading mistake, but that means that if I did get to the point where I was weaving and discovered I had my threading mistake, I have all the right petals on the right shafts in this little group. So my worst case scenario is that I need to rethread this little bunch without having to make a new heddle, without having to rethread that whole half or that whole half, because I know I have the right heddles on the right shafts. Anyhow, so I'm going to fix this threading and then keep going until I'm done threading, so we can check in with Carly and see what she's up to.
I got a couple quick questions for you
Okay.
first.
Yep.
Mary Wood says, how did you wind the ecru threads onto the back beam? Just dispersed across with the other threads?
Oh, that's right. I didn't do that live. Okay. So what I did, yes, I did. I think that was in last week. So Mary, you can go back for the full details about how I distributed them. But briefly, I put the rattle in my beater and I distributed all the multicolors in according to approximate slaying density that I was imagining. I'm going to talk more about that in a little while. And I left thin spots in the rough slay where I knew the wide stripes of the ecru were going to go. There's 6 ends of ecru in brown, or 8 on the outsides. I didn't need to worry about them because they were completely outside the multicolored stripes. And there's 1 or 2 stripes where there are 4 ecru in a row, and I left thin spots there. And the rest of them, it's just 2 ecru. So I didn't worry about that too much. I just shoved them in along with the other threads in like, I knew this ecru was going to be in between this pink stripe and this copper stripe. So I put them in the dent that was between the pink and the copper, or if the pink and copper were all in the same section of the rattle, I just shoved the ecru in there too. And maybe that space was a little denser than the other spaces, but for rough slaying, that doesn't really matter. So then I put each of the chains on their own apron rod. I connected the apron rods together and attached to the back beam. And then I beamed both warps at the same time.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that second picture that you shared, Dawn, which showed the 2 leaf sticks, it also, I'm half threaded at that point. So you can see how the threading kind of alternates between the sticks. And you might also be able to see how the threads have kind of blended together on the back, like as they go over the back beam. The picture doesn't have the warp beam in it, but you can see that the white ones have just sort of worked their way into the warp.
Great. A question from Diametra. She has an Ashford Jack loom and it has a built-in rattle that you can detach. How can she set up the leaf sticks if the rattle is on the back beam?
Well, you don't have to use the rattle that's attached. My Luettes have attached rattles, and I don't always use them. I'm practicing that to see if it's a workflow that works well for me. And I'm trying to think how I well, the rattle is disengaged by this point, right? The rattle is no longer attached to my loom. So even on my Luette, if I use the rattle to spread the warp while I beam, I take it out. Yeah, the leaf sticks are in the front. The rattle is at the back. Even if the rattle is in my beater, the leaf sticks are in front of it. So as I'm beaming, leaf sticks are the front thing, and then the rattle, whether that's in the beater or attached to the castle or at the back beam. And then the rattle comes out and the leaf sticks get moved from the front of the castle to the back of the castle. So you just need to find some way to suspend those leaf sticks, whether that's through cords that go horizontally, like I have always on my loom, or whether it's hanging them from the castle above, which is what, say, my mother always does. She doesn't like this horizontal system I've got. She prefers to hang, and that works better. This works really well for my baby wolf, but it doesn't necessarily work for other looms that are wider. So the hanging from the castle system works well for all of mom's looms, regardless of how many shafts or how wide they are, or whether they're jack or countermarch or counterbalance or whatever. Did that help?
All right, thank you.
Okay.
All right, let's switch over to Carly. Oh wait, let's do that. Looks like Carly has some new colors in her warp.
I finished warping. I think it's gonna be pretty. So
Gorgeous.
thank you. So yeah, I think I got it warped to about the middle section in the last live at the looms. I just went ahead and finished it up, and then I used crank and yank to put the, get this on with my paper. And when I was done, I did like a nice hole at the end just to kind of make sure it's as even as it can be. And now I am simply threading my eyes. So this is kind of cool because I was able to double thread some of these eyes, so I only have to move one thread over. I am finished with this little chunk right here, just in the time that Janet was talking. And then I'm going to tie these little bundles up, I think. So I can move the candle so you can see the petal eyes a little bit more. But what I'm doing is this one's still going to be, if I were to move both petals up and down, I'm still going to get plain weave. So that's a nice way of being able to check that my threading is going okay, is there's some things that are a little bit confusing in here. Hopefully they'll become more clear. But when I move this eye thread over here, then my next thread should be a brown thread in the slot. And here it looks like I might be missing one. So I have to figure out if I just have to move this one over, which maybe I do. And then move it into this slot. So I'm just doing like a little rearranging. So I'm making sure that I can move each one individually. So if I move that one, it works. This one's moving up and down. That one looks like it's going to move up and down and nothing's going to cross over it. So this one, let's move this one over here. I had some writing that kind of moved into different slot thread. And now I have two of these threads. This one I put into the wrong petal eye. It needs to go into the back petal eye. So there we go. So basically I'm using my warp almost like a rattle. Like I'm getting it partially threaded, but I can move these to wherever I need them to go. So this one is going to go through that slot. Skip two eyes. So I'm doing two eyes in the back. Needs to go in the slots in the front. And then another eye in the back. There we go. Perfect. So, and then we can look and make sure. So I've got petal slot in that eye. I can move this slot thread so it's not caught. This one is in that eye. That's great. It shares some space with this thread and it's twisted, but I can untwist it. So that's good. And another eye, and then I just need to move. This one's caught underneath it, but then I could just move it over here. There are many easier ways of doing it. It might have been easier to just count all the threads and just put them all into the slots and not try to do this whole nonsense. Because it is a little bit of a nonsense. Now I've got my hand spun that I just did, and I've got two of them in that back slot. So these actually need to flip to the front. I got a little confused when I was doing. So they're gonna leave these eyes. But this is pretty much all I'm gonna be doing. I'm not sure how interesting this is for people. It's interesting for me.
Well, it's all part of the process.
Yeah, we don't have questions. Anybody have questions?
I have things I can talk about if there are no questions to be answering.
Well, I'll move over to you then. How about that?
Okay. This is just sort of threading 101.
Sure.
And I'm in the stretch, the wide pink stripe, which is straight draw, so 4-3-2-1, 4-3-2-1, 4-3-2-1. So what I always recommend for new weavers is that you pull over one heddle, especially for straight draw, it's one heddle on each shaft, or all the heddles for your next threading repeat, or some section of your threading repeat that's clear and easy to see, rather than just pulling over one and threading it and then pulling over another and threading it. If I pull them all over, I can clearly see that they are all four on different shafts. That's important because I'm sure you've experienced how easy it is to accidentally thread, say, 4-4-2-1 or 4-2-2-1 because you pull the wrong one over. And then I'm going to take the next four threads that go in those heddles, and I'm going to work my fingers between them with my palm down and my thumb facing towards the heddles. My opposable thumb, might as well keep that handy and useful. So like a claw. So the four threads are spaced in my fingers. Can you see that, Dawn, in the camera?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
All right. And then I can use my thumb and finger to hold the thread in question up behind the heddle and pull it through. And then I usually wind up putting my index finger behind the next thread, but they're all spaced out already in my fingers, so it's very easy to get the right next thread. And I sometimes take shortcuts when all the threads are the same, so it doesn't really matter which thread I get next. But if I'm doing stripes or a color order or something, and it's important which thread comes next, then it's easy to get them in my fingers the right way, so that when I'm threading, all I have to worry about is fishing them through. I also always recommend to people that they at least try holding the hook with the hook pointing down rather than up. That seems to work best as if your angle of approach, if the angle you're viewing things at and reaching through the heddles is pointing down, so my eyes and my hook are above the heddle eyes and they point down through the heddle eyes to get to the leaf sticks, which are below. If I was sitting very low and my leaf sticks were up high above the heddle eyes, then I would probably work with my hook pointing up. But usually people's instinct is to hold the hook with the hook pointing up, and it doesn't occur to them that the other might work better. So I suggest whichever way you're used to holding the hook, if you haven't already done this, try holding the hook the other way and try it for a few threads, like a no thank you bite, to see if you like it or if it feels weird or wrong. And if it feels better, well, then you've got a better option than what you had before. Okay, that was what I had to say.
I have a question from Angela Hansen, who says, do you leave the leaf sticks in for the entire time you weave? I seem to have threads break while weaving. I can weave along and at times have 3 threads break. Any ideas why so many?
So first question, do I leave the leaf sticks in? No, I don't. I take them out either after I'm finished threading or after I finish slaying, but certainly before I tie on, because the leaf sticks will affect the tension when I'm tying on, because they change the path of the threads. Other people do leave their leaf sticks in while they weave, but those folks will pull them all the way to the back beam, and I think fairly often attach the sticks to the back beam so that they can't creep forward, because if the sticks come forward, they're restricting your shed, and you can't get as wide or as deep or as clear a shed if the leaf sticks have come forward towards the castle. As for why your sticks or your threads are breaking, if your leaf sticks are in, that could be part of it, because what's happening is that if there's any crosses in the threads before they hit the leaf sticks, and then you advance, those tangles can get caught on the least sticks, and then you advance, and that it forms a little knot. It puts tension and stress on some of those threads. They can snap. It's just the same as when you are beaming. If you get threads crossed in the least sticks while you're beaming. If the least sticks aren't in there, though, then every time the shafts open and close, that action is kind of teasing apart the groups of threads and opening up any potential tangles. So usually that action is more than enough to detangle, uncross any threads as they approach the back of the castle, so that you won't get snarls by the time they hit the heddles. If you're taking your least sticks out and you're still getting those breakages, then I'm not sure. I might, maybe you send a picture so I can look at it, and that might help me diagnose, but I can't promise.
All right. Any other questions, folks?
Okay,
Dimitri said she never would have thought of the spacing her fingers thing. How cool that is.
Yep, that's a trick I learned from Laura Fry. And it means I usually thread in groups of 4 threads. Even on 8 shafts, I'll pull over, like if I was doing straight draw on 8 shafts, I would pull over 8, 7, 6, 5 and those 4 threads and thread them. And then I'd pull over 4, 3, 2, 1 and pull over the next 4 threads and thread them. I want to talk about, if there aren't other questions, I want to talk about another important process I've been doing here as I thread, and that is evaluating and refining my plan for how I'm going to slay these yarns. And so what I've done as I get these wide stripes threaded, I pull them forward over my fingers. Can you see that clearly? Yeah, okay. This is kind of like doing a wraps per inch maneuver. I pull them forward and I evaluate, how much space does that stripe want to take up? So for instance, I had been thinking that I would slay this multicolored with the slub at 16 ends to the inch. So when I pull that forward and I lay them over my fingers and I see how much space they want to take up, this is 16 ends in this stripe. They want to take up a lot more than an inch. If I try to jam them into an inch, it's going to be pretty dense. If I grab a spot where there's very few slubs, I could fit them into an inch or a little bit more. But if I have a space where there's a lot of slubs, they want a lot more room than that. So I have spent a fair bit of time, and this one's, I think, easier to see, pulling this forward, laying them over my fingers, and then holding a ruler or a measuring tape next to them and saying, okay, these 16 ends, they want to be 1.5 inches wide minimum. And if I put them this close in the reed, will I have room for weft to fit in there? Well, I might if it was very fine. So a 16.2, yeah, maybe there's enough weft for that. You may recall on my charts, that I had been estimating a warp set of maybe 10 or 12. So what I'm trying to decide now is, are those reasonable, and do I want to change them at all? Well, as I hold these like this, they're spreading out to 1.5 inches, 16 ends, 1.5 inches wide. That's 12 EPI. That might work. It might. I think it probably would. What I don't want is to have them be too dense and too well, I don't want them to be too loose, obviously, but I also don't want them to be too dense so that the scarf doesn't have much flexibility, which is between you, me, and the fence post, and anybody else who's watching this on YouTube. The stash scarf that I wove for the Weave Along class, it's pretty firm. It does not have much drape to it, and I'm hoping that in wet finishing and with a good hard steam press, it will get more drape. But if it doesn't, then I'm going to wish I had either used tencel or bamboo or silk for the weft instead of cotton, or that I had used a finer weft, or that I had used a more open set. So I have been mindful of that while trying to decide what to do with this warp and how to set this warp, because I don't want it to be that stiff. So I've been, kind of constantly evaluating and pondering what's going to be a good set. Do I want 12 EPI? Do I want 14 EPI? And do we have questions? Should I
I do
pause?
have a question.
Okay.
A follow-up from Angela. As she looks at your loom, you seem to have very heavy heddles. Hers are more like wires. Do wire heddles break? Are they?
No, I wouldn't expect the wire heddles to put more strain on threads. Um, there are things called inserted eye heddles that have very round, very smooth heddle eyes. And I suppose if you had very tender yarns, those would be a little less prone to causing problems. But I personally don't care for them. I don't like them because my favorite sleighing hook or threading hook won't go far enough into them. It gets caught, and they also take up a lot more space than the flat steel heddles, which are my favorite, which is what I have on this loom, or than the wire heddles. And they have more weight, which isn't really an issue for me. But and the space isn't so much an issue for me because I don't work with very fine threads. But if I worked at crazy high, with very, very fine threads and very high ends per inch, like some tiens we know, then the inserted eye might be just too big, to be able to fit enough in an inch. But anyway, to answer your question, I don't think your wire heddles are the problem unless the heddles themselves have a burr or something that's catching on the thread. So if those breakages keep happening in the same place, then you could check the heddles in that spot. But are your threads breaking in the heddles? Are they breaking in the reed? Are they breaking at the least sticks? Where is the break happening? How long is the thread that's left? And that the answer to that question will give you a clue as to what is causing the problem, or at least what's performing the problem, even if we can't get to the cause of it yet.
Barb Thorson reminds us that some heddles have an eye facing one way or the other. Make sure you thread them in the right orientation.
That's very true. And in fact, apart from Texsolve heddles, wire, inserted eye, and flat steel all have the eye facing in a certain direction. It's a little more subtle with some of them than others. The wire ones are a little more forgiving, and they can be twisted to orient whichever way, regardless of how they're hung. Although that's not a great thing to do. But all heddles do have a handedness. So I don't know how clearly you can see this heddle on your screen, but the eye is made up of two parts, and the right side is slightly behind the left side. And because I'm right-handed and using a threading hook, that is easier for me to get my threading hook through. If I was coming at this from the left side with a threading hook and it was oriented this way, I'd be hitting the side of the heddle with my hook. This is covered in the class, the threading where every draft begins, I think. And I talk about the handedness of a threading and the handedness of a heddle. But notice that so this orientation with right behind the left is good if you are right-handed and using a hook. But if I were threading with my fingers and my left hand therefore was, let's see, my right hand was doing performing the majority of the effort, but it was behind the heddle rather than in front, then I would want my heddles hanging the other way. So the way to hang the heddles depends on your handedness, but also whether you use a hook or your fingers. If you use your fingers, I highly recommend that you practice with a hook. But some people have practiced with a hook and they still very much prefer their fingers, in which case heddles the other way may suit you better. And flipping the shaft, like rotating it horizontally, does not change the handedness of the heddles at all. But flipping the shaft vertically switches them from right to left or left to right, which is why baby wolf looms now, I don't know when they started, when they made the change. Mine does not have it, this loom is from the 80s, but newer looms have holes both at the top and the bottom of each shaft. So you can just pop the shaft out, flip it vertically, and pop it back into your loom. So it's very easy to switch it from left to right handed, which is not such an advantage for an individual, but if you have the loom in a classroom, it's great.
All right, we have a question for Carly now, so I'm going to switch over to Carly for a minute.
Great.
Okay, so Sandy P says, please give an overview of the various stages of your threading approach. What did you do first? What next? Then what? And include where the alternate approach I think you mentioned would fit in, please.
Okay, so I don't have the threading map for this particular threading, but I know what it is in my head, where I am threading in an order that goes one thread in a slot in both slots, one thread, which is going to be my fancy thread. So I have like the ground thread and the fancy threads. So the ground threads are all going into slots. They never go into an eye. So I know that I kind of pre-gamed that when I was looking at the draft. So I knew that I had to just thread through every single slot as you do. Plus I'm doubling. So it was, I can pull one doubled loop through and it's going to count as one thread in every slot. Then I knew that all of my fancy threads are going to go into the eyes. So I could have, and probably should have, just threaded those through the slots, going every other slot, because I'm only using one end of my fancy threads because they're thicker. So then it would have been easier for me to have just had all of my threads where they were supposed to be, but I always do this thing where I think I'm going to take a shortcut, and that shortcut always ends up a little bit weird. So what I did instead was I pulled my fancy threads, a pair of them, through the eye, thinking then I could just move one of them and leave the other one in the eye. The problem is then I have to keep my threading sequence in my head as I'm working and skip the right amount of eyes instead of just skipping every other slot, which is so much easier to do. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, so fancy threads go in the eyes. They are jumping back and forth. So I'm putting fancy threads to, and these, the two eyes of this heddle, then I switch two eyes in this heddle, two eyes in this heddle, two eyes in this heddle, which is a pretty easy pattern for me to keep into my head. I just have to make sure I skip the right number of heddle eyes on the front and the back. But what I'm doing now is I've threaded about a third of it, and I just want to see if it's working, if there are mistakes that I have. So I am going to actually tie this on using, this is not quite lashing, but it's where you, let's see if I can move this down just a little bit more so you can see my hands. Maybe too much. I think I'll just there we go. All right, so I cut a bunch of ends of yarn. You could use much stronger yarn for this, but I think this cotton is going to be just fine. So, and I'm tying knots and I'm going to lash on, but instead of lashing on in that way where you thread around through each knot, I'm going to attach it through this. Is this like a hitch or a clove hitch?
Clark said.
Clark said, thank you. So I cut these all about the same size. I'm using my loom to measure them. So they're all about, yay long. Then I'm going to fold them in half and then attach it through here. And then I put both of my heddles down. So my slot threads will hopefully pop up, and I'm going to make sure I can grab the slot threads I need. And this is always where I get a little confused. Like, I'm like, how do I do this? Essentially, I have to, actually, no, I'm doing this wrong. I'm not going to do it that way. Sorry, I'm figuring this out. There's this way that you knot it. It's like you thread it in half. People who know how to do this are probably dying inside. There we go. So I threaded it through there. give it a little bit of tension, and then I'm just going to do an overhand knot that could go through, be retightened. And then I'm going to do the next one. The advantage of this is you get the benefits of lashing because lashing helps you save yarn. Like all of this stuff, this little knot is all I'm going to really lose instead of wrapping it all the way through and having a full knot there. So since I have hand woven on here and all that, or hand spun, I kind of want to be a little bit more, what is the right word? Conservative with my loom waist. I want to have as much of this yarn go into my scarf as possible. But the issue with lashing on is if, which I think Janet has mentioned, the reason why she doesn't like it is if you have to rethread anything, which I probably will, then you have to undo the full lash, fix your issue, and then re-lash everything back on. Here, I can actually, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to test, just do like a couple little, I'm going to weave just this little bit that I just threaded, which is kind of cool, and sort of make sure that these don't get pulled through. I'm going to test to make sure that what I'm doing is actually working. So if I have any fixes or if I have to fix my system, I could do it now before I thread the whole thing. I could also get really excited because I can actually see what I'm making, which is kind of, and then if I have to do any fixes, I just have to take care of this little bundle, untie this, and then retie it back on again. So it's kind of a nice system. I don't do it all the time because it does take more time. So you have to cut all these little ends. But if you are a very precise weaver and your warps are always just perfectly perfect, what's really cool about this is you could cut all these perfectly the same size, have the knots all be in the same row, have these all knots be all in the same row, and then your tension in theory should just be wonderfully exact going all the way through your warp.
For those
And
people who are always perfect.
it was perfectly perfect. Exactly.
That
But
is not me.
No, me neither.
not me either. And I actually had an interesting, well, I think it's interesting. Maybe it's not. You know how, Janet, when you warp, if you have a knot in your thread, you just let it go.
I do, just like this one right here in the front.
I was
But
going to
yes.
ask you about that, Janet.
So one of the advantages of that is because you're probably going to have a knot in almost every warp you're ever going to wind, I feel like. I feel
Yeah.
like knots are the way of the world, right? You're going to have a knot, you're going to have to deal with it. But doing it the way that you do it, where you fix it later on the loom, makes you practice fixing those broken ends every single project. So they don't even, if an end breaks, you're like, oh, well, that broke.
Yeah, there's certainly less of a crisis.
Yeah, like it's like, okay, this is just part of the system, and I'm not going to, I practice this every time I weave because I practice it with the knot. So it's kind of like forcing you to practice a repair over and over and over again. So it doesn't like raise your, I don't know what the right word is, your
Blood
heart.
pressure.
Yeah, you're like, yeah, it's this thing. Okay. You don't have to refigure it out because it's something you only do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's just routine, not a crisis.
Right.
And you do the thing.
Do the thing. So, okay, let's see. This is always like the moment of truth.
I can't wait. I'm
What?
so looking forward to it.
Let's see here.
I've heard of people using that method to tie onto the back beam a fair bit, like lark's heads and knots. I'm not sure that I've heard anybody doing it in the front beam, or at least I don't remember it. But I took a workshop once from somebody who used shoelaces to tie on every bout to her front beam. So it's probably a similar thing. Everybody's got their thing.
Janet, do we have a video of warp repaired? Can you think of that online? In the academy?
We don't. I keep saying that I'm going to make one, and I left some of these knots in specifically so that I can do that live at the Loom, um, and make videos out of them. I mean, I'll if the knots come up while we're live at the Loom, I will deal with it live, and if not, then I'll make a video as I'm fixing it to put in the toolbox.
Great, thank you.
All right.
All right,
So,
Carly's weaving.
sort of. I'm just at least making sure I could get plain weave going. Because if I could get plain weave going, then I know that we are on the right track. I always, if it makes plain weave, that's always what I test with. I feel like it makes it so much easier to see any issues. This one's going to be hard to see. I have to, oh, well, you're not going to work. So I can't move my heels. Details. And you can grab just like maybe a little sticker so we can push those down. Let's see. So when I start weaving, it's always a mess like this. You know, my tension is always a little funky. I could tell that I have an issue right here. This thread should probably be coming through here. So I'm gonna fix that, but I only have to redo that bout. It looks like right here, there's also a missing thread right there. Even though I might still be technically being able to do plain weave, but it's just gonna mess with my EPI. So I'm so glad that I am at least just gonna do this tiny little section here. Not gonna be pretty, we're not gonna get to see the full thing, but at least we could kind of get a sense that there's something's gonna happen. I don't lose all my stuff. Well, let's take this. There we go. Kind of push that down. So I could sort of see like this thread's being kind of knotty there. It wants to do all this stuff. So my eye threads are moving great. That's awesome. It's just some of those slot threads need to be moved around. I might just go ahead and continue warping because I don't see any mistakes that are going to impact the rest of my weaving. Okay, oh yeah. If this one moves, yeah, that one moves over here, it's not going to impact anything. This is kind of a weird area here because I'm going over and then I'm missing, it looks like I'm missing a brown that's supposed to go between these two fancy threads. And then okay, cool. So I might have missed one of my loops with my ground thread. So just like we talked about fixing errors and things, that's going to be really easy to fix. I just fill up like a little bobbin full of the thread that I need and the length that I need it, and then I hang it off the back, and then I just replace my thread and tie it on. So I'll have like a little dangly back here. But it looks like I might, or I can actually just take these and move all of them over. I don't know. I got decisions to make.
While you're thinking about that, Cassian, besides saving yarn, would you suggest she does this every time so that she can easily see her mistakes? She can get confused when she uses multiple heddles.
I think that, you know, for your first few multiple heddle practices, I recommend keeping them really narrow. If you just want to practice, you know, like put on a short warp, put on a narrow thing, and just continue to work with it until it starts to gel and you're like, oh, I get it. It's such an experiential process. It's much less linear. Is a lot of, because the translation of the draft to the translation of the threading map, which doesn't always accurately show what's happening here, with how your brain works, with how your vision works, and all those little things end up, it's sort of like it's a journey. It's like you're having, I think one of my analogies is a lot of people will say like they want to learn how to do this, they want to learn these kind of techniques. but you can't just teach them. It's kind of like saying, I want to learn French. Like you have to practice it. You have to kind of go, okay. Like you could have somebody teaching you the words, but unless you actually speak them and you start to actually use them in real life, you're never really going to know it. So yes, I think that, yeah, something like this could help. And also just be like, okay, today's a practice day. I'm just going to practice this kind of threading. Croquebrog is great for multiple heddle threadings too, because it's so wide. And it's a two heddle, like almost like a three shaft twill, the 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2. So it repeats, but I think that croquebrog or like a weft faced weave is a really good way of practicing because this is so quick to warp. And you can tear it out and rewarp it and tear it out, rewarp it. And then after a while, you start to see the patterns emerge. That's kind of fun. Okay, I think I know what I'm going to do with this here. All right, so that's all I've got, unless anybody has any more questions.
I don't have any open questions. Let's see what Janet's up to.
I just finished threading. I'm going to take my least sticks out now. And then put my reed in, and soon I'm going to have to commit to a slaying order.
Oh, no.
So, least sticks out first.
I think you're going to beat me, Janet.
Woohoo!
Yeah,
That's because I did half my threading off camera.
that's true. All I did was just spent like an extra hour winding on and getting this prepped up.
And it's
But
not a
next,
race.
what? It's not a race, but you and I talked about how like when you're
But
in
I'm
class,
still
you
going to win. I have to open my door in order to get my least sticks out because my room is too small. Wait, maybe not. Maybe not. I can't wait until my studio is done.
Try it. That's gonna be so cool.
Soon. Maybe. I hope. There, sticks out.
I feel like every time I do a project, I always learn something new. Just so fun.
All right. Now, where's my reed? I'm going to use an 8-dent reed because I think I'm going to do some of these at 12 EPI, and an 8 makes that easy. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And also because I don't want the slubs on this multi to get caught in, certainly in a 12, or even in a 10. So I'm going to use an 8. Just have to find it. I have several. Here we go. That's an 8. Yeah. Okay. Top of my beater. Whoops, sorry, hit the camera. I love that shaft looms have slots in the top of the beater so that you can take these on and off the top of the beater. Sorry, they have slots in the tops of the swords here so that the beater, the wing nuts, the bolts, I suppose, don't have to be removed from the top of the beater in order to put it back on, take it off and put it on. So I just cut those slots into the swords of my Leclerc beater too. And it's a great quality of life enhancement.
Cool.
Okay. So now I got to decide how I'm going to slay this, or at least I got to decide how I'm going to start slaying it, because I can always change my mind and make a change. And one thing I wanted to talk about was, so to get 12 and an 8, you slay 1 thread in the first slot, then 2 threads in the second, 1 in the third, 2 in the fourth. And that pattern, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, gives you 12 EPI. Because you have, let's see, 3 threads in every 2 dents, because 1 in the first, 2 in the second. And there's only 2 in the pattern. 3 threads and 2 dents. 3 divided by 2 was 1.5 times 8 EPI gives you 12 ends to the inch. If I use the pattern 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, well, that's 4 threads in every 3 dents. So if I divide 4 by 3 and multiply by 8, that 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2 threading will give me 10.8 EPI. So if I'm waffling between 10 EPI and 12 EPI, well, I can pick one that's basically in the middle. 10.8 is close to 11. A 1, 1, 2 will give me something that's between 10 and 12. If I do 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, well, that's 1 plus 2 plus 2 is 5 threads in 3 dents, and 5 divided by 3 times 8 EPI, that's the read I'm using, is just over 13 EPI. So if I'm waffling between 12 and 14, say, well, I could pick that one and be somewhere in between. So my plan, what I have written down here, I keep changing my mind every time I sit at this loom or think about it, about, how do I want to slay these? I change my mind, which tells me probably any of them would work. But what I have written down here on my piece of paper is that I'm going to do the copper, that's this one, at 122, which is 13.3 EPI, give or take. And the other one, so that's the ecru, the sparkly, and the pink, I was going to do at 112, which is 10.8 EPI, give or take. And so that's what I'm going to start with. And as I'm pulling them through the slots, if I feel like things are too dense in there or too sloppy, too loose, well, then I may readjust, rethink. But that's where I'm going to start. Can you see? Yeah, you can. Okay.
Yeah.
I can drop the camera a little bit too.
That's
there.
Pretty good.
So I like to keep my shafts raised for this step so that, because I'm reaching over the beater to get to the threads, and normally they're up even higher. In fact, I could lift them up higher now because I don't need to see the least sticks anymore. The least sticks are out. So I can take this block out and put the shuttle in like I normally do, which is down here under the jacks. And there, see, the head lies are pretty much at the top of the beater. That's very easy for me to reach. The other thing I've been debating about is these brown threads. I wound up, weaving pun, winding 4 ends of brown rather than 2 because the brown was so fine. And I've been debating, am I going to thread these as twill, like 4, 3, 2, 1, or in this case, it would be 2, 1, 4, 3, or am I going to treat them as doubled ends, 2 through a heddle? Am I going to treat them like basket weave? What am I going to do? And I'm changing my mind every 10 minutes on this one, but I decided in the end that I was going to pull 2 through a heddle, treat them as doubled ends. So it won't be quite like basket weave. There won't be 2 separate heddles on the same shaft side by side, which means these threads can twist around each other and just act like a thicker thread. And the last, or the first one on this side and the last one on the other side, I'm going to take out of the heddle to make a floating selvage. That came up in the Q&A. I did not, I'm not going to add an extra thread weighted off the back to be my floating selvage. I'm going to take my last warp thread out of the heddle. But I usually thread it through the heddle at the beginning, thread all the heddles first, and then take it out of the heddle because I know myself that I will screw the threading up if I try to remember to just not use the first heddle or put the first thread in the heddle. It's easier for me, for my brain, to thread everything and then take things out of the heddle. And I often leave it in there to slay too. So I'm gonna, like, all these threads, I have no idea actually how wide this is going to be. I think it's going to be somewhere around 12 inches. So I'm going to start slaying somewhere around 6 inches. But because my reed is shorter than the width in my beater, I can shift it back and forth to center things afterwards. And I'm going to pull all 4 of these through that slot because this is this is, well, one of them's going to come out to be the, oh, what am I trying to say?
Floating salvage.
Thank you, floating salvage. Blah, blah, blah. All right. So now I've got a little bit of the white, and the white I had decided I'm going to slay at 1 and then 1 and then 2. So I'm just going to start doing it. 1.
All right, well, guess what time it is?
Is it really?
It's 4:01. Yeah. Do we have any
Wow.
questions? That went fast. Anybody? Last minute questions? This is really, it's just fun to watch. I mean, lots of us just are learning things by seeing your fingers work differently than our fingers.
Anybody? We should
Nope.
tell them that we're going to do, we don't have live at the Loom next week, but we're adding an extra live at the Loom the following week. So that'll be the 13th.
Great.
And we'll be underway then. Here, I'm just going to point out, I'm doing my 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, but that would have meant, so 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, I have a doubled end there in the same, 2 heddles on the same shaft. They went through the same dent. That's good. And then I had 3 of these sparkly ones. So in theory, it would have been 1 and then 2. So 1 sparkly plus the next thing. But that next thing is 2 ends traveling together on shaft 4 that I want to act like basket weave, and I don't want to split them up. So I'm just going to make it 1, 1, 1 and then my 2. You know, you're allowed to fudge if everything is all sort of eclectic and mixed up anyway. If I had the same yarn all the way across, I wouldn't fudge the threading like that. But, well, maybe I would if I had an eclectic threading, if I had doubled ends here and there. Yeah. And now I'm going to go back to my 1, 1, 2.
All right, so coming up next on Monday, we've got peer support. On Saturday the 5th, we've got website and tools help. April 5th, how are we in April? And on April 6th, we've got office hours with Janet. So I hope we'll see you real soon. Any last? Let's see, get back to Zoom. Hello. Oh, I just got a bunch of questions. Let's see. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Sandy says, Carly, can you share any specifics about how you make your low profile stick shuttles? What kind of wood, how thick, where you find it to purchase, how you cut it, how wide do you recommend it as compared to your loom width, etc.
We have a toolbox on that, on making balsa wood stick shuttles that Carly wrote, right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, balsa wood, and then you cut little notches in the side. This one's really long. It's too long. Well, this will be a good size actually once this is done. So you can actually make it almost the same size as your weaving, and it's cool because you can get off to the edge. That's one loop, and then you have another loop, so it goes really fast. Or not really fast.
Beth from Wyoming says, the stash weave along got me all out of all the warp has to be the same EPI, makes me more flexible. Awesome.
Yay.
And Janet, you're right-handed, aren't you?
I am.
Gotcha.
So I always
Brenda.
work from the right. I always recommend that people at least try starting on their dominant side for threading and for slaying and work all the way across rather than starting from the middle and working out. There are situations in when from the middle out makes sense for certain reasons, but generally speaking, the motions are easier, more comfortable, faster if you start from your dominant side and work away.
All right. Oh, let's see. Oh, Sandy added a comment to her first question. Let's see if I can find that. Carly, do you figure out your preferred process to do the threading, then develop the sequence of moving your heddles to get the pattern you want rather than threading to correspond with the pattern?
I actually based this one off of a draft so I could kind of see how it's going to work with the draft. I hope that makes sense. So the movement of the heddles, I don't like there's already like this is almost like a huck weave structure, and I've done huck weave quite a few times on this, so I know which way my heddles are gonna move. But yeah, all that stuff I kind of predetermined with the draft. I was like, oh, this kind of concept will work well with this draft. So I already have my lift sequence mostly mapped out. Hope that made sense.
Great, yeah. All right.
So just before we sign off again, I am I'm doing this 1 1 2 1 1 2 or 1 2 2 depending on what yarn it is, but like where this there I have these three ends of the 1 2 2 in the middle of a bunch of ends of 1 1 2. I'm just going to shove things in where they make sense. And when I have two ends threaded side by side on the same shaft, I'm putting them through the same dent, even if that's not where the two falls in my pattern. So I want people to get that it doesn't have to be real consistent, and it doesn't have to be you don't have to agonize over it. You can just kind of wing it. And as long as your stripes are narrow and you've got lots of different textures, then all those sort of unevennesses will just add to the overall effect rather than standing out. If you have uniformity across your warp, color, thread, whatever, then having exceptions in your slaying orders stand out and they look like mistakes. But I don't have uniformity here, so it'll be okay.
Great.
Why some of the hardest stuff to weave is like plain weave cloth with no
Oh,
flaws perfectly.
oh, perfectly, perfectly perfect.
If you start to add a little complexity into there, you can kind of start to hide some stuff.
Oh, yeah, it's hard.
You have eagle eyes, so you catch everything.
Well,
All right.
means I see what I don't want to see too.
And I used to take a picture of things, so I always found my mistakes in a picture better than
Oh
I
yeah.
could see them.
Oh, for sure. Best way to find threading or treadling or any kind of mistake is to take a picture and then post it in social media, and then it is obvious. And if you don't see it, seven other people will tell you about it. But I usually it's like posting a post that has a typo in it. You don't see it until you've hit send.
Yeah.
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 All right.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll see you soon, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for another live at the Loom.
And I'll see you on the weekend, next weekend for office hours.
Office hours. Yep.